Hello, everyone, and welcome to the stephenkingcast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I will review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication. That's normally what I say at the beginning of every one of these episodes, but this week is a little different because this week I'm not going to review anything by Stephen King. I want to acknowledge that I didn't put out an episode last week. As you know, I have been in the midst of doing an exploration of Stephen King's televised works that I hadn't gotten around to on the first leg of the podcast when it first launched over 12 years ago. It'll be the 13th anniversary this year, I believe. So since really December or January, I've been back at it on a weekly basis, and it's been awesome to be back diving into these Stephen King televised works that I haven't gotten around to. So I want to acknowledge that last week I didn't put out an episode, and I just want to explain what's going on with the podcast, today, and just what's going on in my life. So just to cut to the chase, the reason why there wasn't an episode last week is because my father has passed away. So clearly that has really rocked the family, and that's the reason why I've been a little bit behind. So if you have if you follow me on Facebook, you'll see that I posted something there about that. So clearly I've been focusing on that and my family and just being there with my family. So thank you all for the warm wishes. Dad was great. Dad, in fact, was a huge part of me becoming a Stephen King fan. It's something that he supported very early on when I was getting into Stephen King. He would read the books with me as well, and we would always talk about it, or he would read the books ahead of time. And so we always had that shared relationship, that shared piece of history together. Whenever he would check in on me and ask, what I was reading, he would always say, did insert author's name here. So, let's just say Stephen King, or let's just say Dean Koontz. Hey, I'm reading a new book by Dean Koontz. He'd say, did he kill off half the human race? It was always a reference to The Stand, and it was just his ongoing joke that he thought was hilarious. But in terms of Stephen King, spoiler alert for The Stand, there's a moment that always stands out to me and is always at the forefront of my brain whenever I think of him, and whenever I think of Stephen King. It's when I was in the midst of reading The Stand and loving it, and he knew that Nick Andros was my favorite character. And spoiler alert for The Stand, everybody. I think that I talked about this on my review of the book, but there was one day he comes over and he asks me how where I am in the book, and I kind of describe wherever it is that I'm in, and then he goes, "Is Nick dead yet?" And there's this pause in the house, and then you can just hear my mom yell at him, and he realizes the mistake that he made, and he'll always be near and dear to my relationship with Stephen King. And I posted on Facebook, there was a scene from Twin Peaks that has always stuck with me. There's a character on Twin Peaks played by Don Davis, Major Briggs, who for all intents and purposes is as close to a fictional version of my dad as possible. And there's a scene that always stuck with me in Twin Peaks when Major Briggs is talking to Bobby at the Double R Diner, and Bobby has been a rebellious youth at that point, and by no means was I like Bobby, but the warmth and the optimism and this monologue that Major Briggs gives is beautiful, and it describes this glowing, loving, warm future for Bobby in Major Briggs's dignified, respectful, formal way, but speaking with openness and honesty, and it's beautiful and it's moving. And clearly that was one of the first things that I thought of upon the passing of my father, just so I could be a little bit close to him in that moment and feel that. And then I'll always think about my favorite movie, Jaws. This is something that we shared, and my other fictional version of Dad, he really is a cross between Major Briggs from Twin Peaks and Chief Brody from Jaws. He has the by the book stiffness, and respectability and respectful nature of authority and dignity of Major Briggs, but he kind of has the kind of wise ass nature to him too of Chief Brody. But that's always on my mind, and I've just been thinking of the scene between Brody and Sean at the dinner table. Give us a kiss. Why? Because we need it. That's something that Dad always said to me. He was a good man, and I'm grateful that I got to be his kid. And there's been a lot of reflection over the last week or so, and I just wanted to take a moment and thank all of you. But that is why I was not able to put out a new episode over the last week. But I don't want to lose any momentum that I have had. So what I'm going to be doing in this episode is I'm going to be releasing for free one of the Patreon episodes that I put out this past winter, in order to celebrate the return of HBO's House of the Dragon Season 3. So what you're getting in this episode is a breakdown of the first couple episodes of Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which was an incredible season of television. I would strongly recommend everyone to go check it out. But this particular episode, it's a great way to get back into Westeros, because I explain my relationship to Westeros, my relationship to George R.R. Martin. I explain my thoughts on Game of Thrones as a franchise, and I discuss my thoughts on the divisive nature of the finale and the ending and the final season of Game of Thrones, because as you all know in pop culture, there are a lot of thoughts on that. So over on Patreon, I will be reviewing regularly the House of the Dragon Season 3. As of this recording right now, the second episode has aired. I haven't seen it yet, but sometime this week I'm going to sit down and put together my thoughts of episodes 1 and 2 of the third season and release that. Over on Patreon, I am also reviewing The Vampire Lestat, which is the third season of Interview with a Vampire, which you can find on AMC or AMC Plus. I highly recommend that show. I highly recommend the first 2 seasons of Interview with a Vampire. It is probably the best thing on television, and the performance by Sam Reed as Lestat is as perfect a representation and portrayal of a character as Christopher Reeve was as Superman, as Patrick Stewart was as Professor Xavier. There is a melding between actor and character that you don't get to see too often, and fans of Interview with the Vampire have actually referred to it as the spirit of Lestat has actually taken over the body of actor Sam Reed. It's really incredible stuff what they're doing over there, and that has been a blast to be able to cover. But if you are interested, over on Patreon, there are 2 feeds. One feed gives you access to all the book reviews that I'm doing and early access to the Stephen King cast. And then the other feed that I do, Other Worlds Than These, gives you everything from the other Patreon feed, plus weekly reviews of non-Stephen King related materials, which has included A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, a review of Primate, the awesome monkey horror movie that came out earlier this year, a breakdown of Godzilla and his role throughout pop cultural history, a deep dive into Gareth Edwards' 2014 Godzilla movie, a exploration of King Kong and the Monsterverse, and then a weekly review of Monarch Legacy of Monsters season 2. I did a whole episode on Batman, focusing primarily on the newest incarnation of Batman, the Absolute Batman, which has just been announced that there's going to be an animated series on that. Please pay attention to this particular incarnation of the character, because we are going to be seeing Batman head into public domain. So I have all of my thoughts on that in the Batman episode. I broke down the history of Daredevil and Daredevil's role from Netflix onward as I led into a weekly review of Daredevil Born Again Season 2. I did a review of Something Very Bad Is Going to Happen, the incredible Netflix series that aired in late March or early April. I strongly recommend it. I did a review of 28 Years Later and The Bone Temple and The Boys. I gave kind of my thoughts on how I feel about The Boys. I did not wind up covering it nearly as much as I wanted to because that was smack dab in the middle of Daredevil and Monarch Legacy of Monsters. I've also been able to start to dive into the works of Dean Koontz. I've reviewed Dean Koontz's Winter Moon, Dean Koontz's Twilight Eyes, Dean Koontz's Dragon Tears. So that has been really enjoyable, and all of my reviews are there. I did for May the 4th be with you, I did a breakdown of Star Wars, how Star Wars is important to me, and the difficult spot we find Star Wars as a franchise in right now, and how fractured it is, and it's serving too many masters, and no one really knows what to do with it at the moment. Keeping on with Star Wars, I did a review of Maul Shadow Lord over on Disney, which was exquisite. I did a 2-episode review of Widow's Bay. I did a review of Obsession. I did a review of the novel Anne Rice Interview with the Vampire and the book The Vampire Lestat. I did a review, speaking of Star Wars, of The Mandalorian and Grogu, of Dean Koontz's The Servants of Twilight, and the Backrooms I was able to talk about, as well as, I don't know if I mentioned, reviewing Obsession as well. So this has been the great 1-2 punch of horror in the theater lately. And Marcus Clyworth's The Caretaker, which was an incredible novel to read, and I want to put Marcus Clyworth on everyone's radar. So there's a lot of good stuff over on Patreon. And for the rest of the summer, as long as House of the Dragon is on and Vampire Lestat, I'll be reviewing those regularly. And anytime I have thoughts on one of the books that I am reading, I will put my thoughts out on Patreon as well. And what to expect on this feed over the next couple weeks once I get everything back up and running. I'm going to start to dive back into all of the works of Stephen King on television that I never got around to. The next thing that is up to talk about is Big Driver, starring Maria Bello. So I just watched that yesterday, and I'll be able to put my thoughts out on that shortly. It's going to go over onto Patreon first, and then following that, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on the second season of Mr. Mercedes. So that will be a few episodes of that, because these are 10 episodes of television, and they're good. If you remember my thoughts on Mr. Mercedes, the novel, I did not like it, and I have mixed feelings about the sequels, but what David E. Kelley was able to do with the characters in the television show is the best version of what they can be, and I really love spending time in that world. And then I'll just keep moving on from there. So thank you for understanding that there was a missing episode from last week, but I'm not going on one of those long stretches where I just kind of disappear as I've done from time to time. Nope, I'm still committed and invested in this podcast, and I love doing it. And thank you everyone who has stuck with it over the 12, 13 years that it's been on. I really appreciate it. And if at any point you have any thoughts, please write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. Feel free to check on the Patreon feed over at patreon.com/stephenkingcast. And without further ado, here is my full review of Night of the Seven Kingdoms, episodes 1-4, and a tour through Westeros. Thank you, everyone, and may you have long days and pleasant nights, and I'll see you here next time where MOON spells Stephen King Cast. like I said, that brings us to A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. And I'm super pumped, guys, because, like I said, I've wanted to talk about George R. R. Martin and Westeros for quite a while, and I never was able to find an entryway into it. But now here we are with a new phase of the Stephen King cast, and a perfect opportunity to talk about a show that definitely requires and deserves us talking about it. So, what is my relationship with Game of Thrones? You all know my relationship with Stephen King, but with Game of Thrones, when it first came out, spoiler alert for the first season of Game of Thrones, if you hadn't seen it, spoiler alert: Sean Bean dies. Ned Stark is decapitated in the conclusion of the first season, and it really set the stage for the stakes of the show, and that's when it really started to garner attention from mass audiences. And up until then, I wasn't interested at it. I was just not in the mood. I had devoted a lot of my time in the early 2000s to Lord of the Rings, and I loved Peter Jackson's trilogy of Lord of the Rings. But at this time, I just wasn't in the mood for fantasy. And I understood that it was a more adult take on things. It was grittier. It was more violent. There was a lot more sex. I understood these things about it, but I just didn't want to get into it despite the discourse around it, despite the critical acclaim that it was getting. Just something about it. I don't know. Like sometimes, when you're a contrarian, and people are telling you that something's awesome and you're like, yeah, whatever. That's kind of how I felt. And then the second season was about to premiere, and HBO was running a marathon, and I don't know what I was doing. I don't know if I was like cleaning the house, I was like just cleaning the living room, or I was getting some work done, or maybe I was just like reading comics. I don't know, but I decided I needed something in the background. And I'm like, okay, like I put on HBO and I saw that it was on, and like, okay, like whatever, it's Game of Thrones. I might as well just like kind of check it out as I do whatever it was that I was doing. And what the scene was it was with the Dothraki, and it was Viserys absolutely crashing out in the tent and demanding his crown, and that they, obey him. And I am watching this scene, and if you don't remember the scene, it's when they melt all of the gold and they hold him still, and then they pour the melted gold all over his head. I had never seen anything like that. The level of, I guess, the innovation of brutality, and on top of that, the way in which they filmed the scene, it was really gripping. And for someone that didn't know what was going on, all I knew was everything that I needed to know was conveyed perfectly in that scene. That this guy was a brat, arrogant, petulant, spoiled, whiny, and completely out of his depth without him knowing about it. And you can tell in that moment that things are going so south so quickly, and he's the only one that doesn't realize what is about to happen until it actually happens to him. And his scream, and again, I have never seen anything like that depicted on screen before, and it's so visceral that you can feel it. You can almost feel it. So from that second that happened, I said, okay, I think that I'm into Game of Thrones. So then my wife and I started watching it together, and we got hooked. We got hooked on Game of Thrones. And of course, I think that for everyone, when the Red Wedding happens, it just bumps up to a completely different level of watching it, of not knowing what to expect, of complete devastation as a viewer, as a reader, of how bold the storytelling is. And all of these things that I'm saying clearly have been discussed at length and written about and have gone down in the history of television when talking about Game of Thrones, for sure. Absolutely. I'm not saying anything new, but I am adding, my own thoughts to that it was true, that there was something so, as brutal and horrifying as that scene is, to be a part of it and to watch it in real time, especially if you don't know that it's going to happen, and to have it to be this zeitgeist moment that you're watching unfold, it really is something special. And the show was something special. And it was funny because the Red wedding happened about a month before our wedding. So we told the DJ to have the national version of Reigns of Castamere play, which was pretty funny because once it started playing during the reception, there were a couple Game of Thrones fans in the crowd who all of a sudden they got it and they reacted appropriately. They just ran out of the reception. It was perfect. It was perfect. So that was a lot of fun. And I'll talk about the ending of Game of Thrones, but leading up throughout the duration of Game of Thrones, and the discourse soured on the show in that final season, but there's no denying the Pavlovian response of enjoyment, okay, that just comes, the serotonin hit when you hear the HBO logo come on, followed by the score, and just knowing that you're in it for an hour, and it's a feeling of such intensity and Sunday night programming that I don't know if I'm ever going to have replicated, even in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, even in House of the Dragon. It really was special while it was special. There really was nothing like it. It was a wonderful experience, and I don't regret a second of it. And I'm talking about the final season as well. So about the final season, I know that it is contentious. And part of my, I don't want to say ambivalence, but my reservation of condemnation against it is partially because I had never read the books, and I didn't have that level of fandom. And I purposefully did not seek out the books once the show started, because almost everything else that I listed in things to look forward to on the Stephen King cast, whether it's a Stephen King book, whether it's an adaptation of something, I'm going to be talking about Absolute Batman, I'm going to be talking about Lanterns, I'm going to be talking about Godzilla, I'm going to be talking about all of these things that I'm very steeped in. There was something so freeing about being able to just watch a show and not know anything, and to be surprised, and to not have the expectations and the weight of expectations from a text getting in the way, much in the way that my familiarity with the text and my expectations and nerdy understanding of the lore and mythology of it got in my way of being able to fully enjoy Welcome to Derry. Well, you could argue also that Welcome to Derry just wasn't that great, but shouldn't I have enjoyed it more? I probably should have. And what got in the way? My analytical brain just always taking everything that's being presented to me and me filtering it through my years of the text. And thankfully, I didn't have that with Game of Thrones. And and I don't blame anyone that soured on the ending of Game of Thrones when it finally wrapped up, because for book fans, what Benioff and Weiss gave to everyone is going to be the ending, because George R. R. Martin's not going to finish it. An ending will come eventually. Someone will write it. The publisher will gather a collection of colleagues and other fantasy writers to take his ideas and provide an ending. And an ending will come, but George R. R. Martin's soul ending, it's not going to happen. So there's a level of disappointment on multiple levels for people that have been around since the beginning in the 1990s of A Song of Ice and Fire, and the feeling that they must have had when the show first started, thinking that this was going to prompt George to be able to start to give him the momentum needed to push through and finish those final books. But I think the inverse happened. I think that as it continued to grow, the more intimidating it is, and especially when fandom began to sharpen its claws, what's the motivation at this point for George R. R. Martin to actually finish a story that he has been struggling with already? It seems to me that he doesn't seem to be entering the writing with a lot of confidence, and I don't blame him, because man, did critics' claws get sharp there at the end, and he saw how his story, as adapted by Benioff and Weiss, get completely eviscerated in pop culture, and that has to be a horrible feeling, and B, so terrifying. For someone that watched his property get completed before he was able to do so. And you would think that maybe he could go into it righting the wrongs that Benioff and Weiss contributed to the story. But another way of looking at it is, what if the ending is closer to what he envisioned? And, they maybe just didn't present it to the best of their ability. But if the bones are still basically what he presented to them, I think that there's going to be a lot of disappointment for fans who are looking for something completely different. So I can understand that for fans not getting a lot out of the ending and feeling betrayed and feeling that it just kind of ran out of steam and there wasn't as much attention to detail. I can understand that level of disappointment. But for me, being just a show fan, I'm not going to say that I didn't have a lot of expectations, but I didn't have the weight of that additional layer of fandom that book readers had. So was I annoyed and disappointed when Daenerys quote unquote just kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and her dragon was shot out of the sky, though they had the aerial view? Does that seem sloppy? Yes, absolutely. The Clegane Bowl, where that just seemed to come out of nowhere, and you had these two brothers fighting for pure spectacle and zero storytelling reasons or motivations. Yeah, it was annoying. When Jaime and Cersei died by being buried in under the rubble of King's Landing, only for their bodies to be found by Tyrion in the next episode 10 feet away, where they could have just gotten to safety. That's annoying. But even within these imperfections, the trajectory of the show I understood. So, for instance, there's a lot of talk of Daenerys's turn towards quote-unquote madness, and people were disappointed in that. And people were disappointed, A, that they were rooting for this character, and B, the turn itself. So for me, when I watched it, and the bells start, and then she, unleashes hell with Drogon, if I thought for a second that it was the bells that just drove her insane, yeah, that would be annoying. But in that moment, that's not how I read it. How I read it was, this was a girl who had to go into exile from the earliest age. And though she was royalty, she was sold, she was raped, she was used, she fell in love, her love died, she lost the ability to bear children, she was forced into slavery, she raised dragons, had those dragons stolen. They were returned. She wound up, losing the dragons. She garnered power. And after she had the means to take her throne back, her what she believed, and many would argue she's the rightful heir, to go home and to take her throne back, which she deserved, she was told no. You have to wait by her trusted advisors. You can't go over there with dragons. You can't be the queen of cinders and ash. You have to do it through another means. Okay, she listens to them. What happens when she listens to them? Her dragons die. The new love of her life rejects her. Her allies turn on her. When she comes back to her lands, she's rejected by the people. They are afraid of her. They don't want her, even though she fights their fight against the White Walkers, which she doesn't have to. And in doing so, she loses one of her dragons for their cause. She is still rejected by them. She is turned against. Her best friend and confidant is murdered by the queen. Her most loyal knight dies. Her army is slaughtered. And then her most trusted advisors turn on her and try to kill her. All of these things happened because she listened to everybody else. And in listening to everybody else, she lost everything. And then being able to use her dragon breath and being able, to lean on the thing that she had this entire time, only then, which she wanted to do in the first place. And had she done, she wouldn't have lost anything. That's when the bells start. That's when Cersei says mercy. And to me, every tragedy, every indignity, every loss, every moment that led to that, where she had to suffer when she was right, when those bells started and Cersei's asking for mercy, to me, in Daenerys' mind, she's saying, mercy? Mercy? You want mercy? Let me show you what my mercy looks like. And that's when she unloads with Drogon. So to me, it made sense. To me, that made sense from a character standpoint. So that I did not mind. Cersei being buried with Jaime under the rubble of King's Landing, I have no issue with whatsoever. To me, Cersei being buried under the bricks of the city that she murdered, anyone in her way for, sold her soul for, basically, had her children die for her to be buried underneath that city, by the city, perfectly fitting. And Jaime, though his return to her is disappointing for sure, still rightfully within his character, didn't not make sense to me. So all of that, it was more than justified. It worked for me completely. Bronn becoming king of ships or king of coin, like that's fan service. Bran becoming the king, I don't even mind. Like, who has the best story of them all? Okay, I mean, I don't mind it. I really don't. I mean, for a story whose first episode begins with the fall of this character, to have the final episode conclude with the rise of that same character to king, it's all full circle to me. That works. So I didn't mind the end of Game of Thrones the way that a lot of people minded the end of Game of Thrones. Did it get a little bit loose with geography? Did it get a little bit loose with the depth and density of its storytelling? Absolutely. But the large story beats, I really didn't mind. And for all the reasons I just discussed about the big ones, okay, I was totally there for. So And part of that is because I didn't have the expectations of the books, and I just got to enjoy it as a fan of television. And then House of the Dragon came out, and again, it got to rekindle it. And I fell in love all over again with the Targaryens, and I wasn't sure how the show would do within the pop culture discourse because they had turned on this property following the conclusion of Game of Thrones. But something happened. People fell in love with House of the Dragon. And they showed that you can tell a story involving the dragons and involving the Targaryens without picking up where we had left off with the characters that we had fallen in love with, and that there was an appetite for the larger history of Westeros. So I fell in love with House of the Dragon, and then I got really excited about A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Now, I never read like I said, any of the texts. So I haven't read the adventures of Dunk and Egg. But through pop cultural osmosis, there were definitely some things that I had learned that are spoilers, but it didn't discourage me from jumping into this. And as I'll get into, the main draw of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is the variety that it brings to this world of Westeros. So, what I'm going to be doing is, at the time of this recording, 4 episodes have aired. I'm just going to read the Wikipedia summary for each of the episodes, give my breakdown and my thoughts on the strengths of each one of those episodes, and then conclude with just overall thoughts as we head into the next episode. So from here on out, I'm either going to review each episode by itself, or I'll wait for a couple more to release, and kind of do it in a batch. But you're definitely going to be getting more. But up first, let's talk about the first episode. And from Wikipedia, Dunk, a young squire, buries his mentor, Sir Arlen of Pennytree, who died during their journey to the town of Ashford, where a tournament is being held. Dunk considers selling Arlen's 3 horses and joining the City Watch in King's Landing. But when he picks up Arlen's sword and shield, he decides to enter the Ashford tournament to forge his own destiny. Dunk visits an inn where he meets a bald, insolent boy who insists on being his squire. After a strange encounter with a drunken nobleman, Dunk finds the boy wearing Arlen's armor and riding his war horse. Dunk berates the boy and refuses to help before leaving alone. After arriving in Ashford, Dunk meets with Plummer, Ashford's steward, to register for the tournament. Dunk claims that Arlen knighted him before dying, but Plummer explains that Dunk can only participate if someone vouches for him. Plummer also warns Dunk that losing in the tournament means forfeiting his horses and armor to the victor and paying a ransom to get them back, which Dunk cannot afford. Dunk seeks out Sir Manfred Dondarrion, as Arlen previously served as father. He is mocked by a pair of prostitutes for his ragged appearance, who claim that Manfred is sleeping. While wandering the tournament grounds, Dunk witnesses Sir Stephen Fossaway abusing his squire, Raymond Fossaway. Without a pavilion of his own, Dunk camps outside the tournament grounds. Later that evening, Dunk returns to Manfred's tent to find him still unavailable. He then watches a puppet show featuring a fire-breathing dragon performed by Tansel. Raymond invites Dunk to attend a banquet, where he meets the charismatic Sir Lionel Baratheon, an MVP of the show. After dancing together, Lionel expresses his doubts about Dunk performing well in the tournament against trained knights. Dunk soon finds Manfred, but does not remember Arlen and dismisses him. Dunk returns to his camp to find the bald boy waiting for him, who showed initiative by cleaning Dunk's camp and caring for his horses. The boy introduces himself as Egg and tells Dunk that he needs a better name if he's to be a knight. Dunk names himself Sir Duncan the Tall and agrees to take Egg on as his squire. That night, they witness a shooting star, which Egg claims will bring them good luck, but Dunk wonders if the luck will be theirs alone. So, thoughts. This show is a complete breath of fresh air. So, like I said before the Wikipedia summary, the strength of this show is the variety. What you get out of House of the Dragon, though it takes place at an earlier timeline, and though it's purely focused on the Targaryens and their inter-family conflict. You don't have the War of the Five Kings. It's still that high-born political, geographical, warring intrigue, where there's high stakes, the highest of stakes. You have fire-breathing dragons. You have kingdoms. You have royal love and losses. You have families at war with one another. You have shifting allegiances and betrayals and tragedy and of the highest level. This is completely different. This is a completely different perspective for the show to take. We have not seen anything like this in Game of Thrones. By focusing on not just a knight, because we've seen knights before. We got to know Sir Barristan Selmy. I think that's Barristan Selmy. That's his name, right? And Sir Jorah Mormont, the failed knight. We have seen knights before. We have lived with knights before, but this is different. This isn't just a knight. This is a hedge knight. He's like one step above being poor, but not. He's a little bit more noble than your typical unhoused, but not noble enough to be a knight of respect. And Dunk is just a complete breath of fresh air. Right away, you are rooting for this guy who is sweet, but not stupid. He is idealistic and naive, but he has heart and he has belief in knighthood and honor. And in a world where so much of what has been defined within Game of Thrones has been about dishonesty and the subversion of the medieval qualities as told in fairy tales and classic literature, where it subverts these traditional values that resound through the generations. The fact that it repurposes it and really does tell a story of someone who is just good. He may not be a great man, but he is a good man. And it's so refreshing to actually watch. And it wouldn't work. This show would not work if they did not find that perfect chemistry between Dunk and Egg. The sassiness and insolence, as Wikipedia said, of Egg, and the quiet kindness. And a little bit slow on the uptake of societal norms of Dunk. It's the proof. The proof is in the pudding. I don't know. It's the secret ingredient, the magic sauce, I guess you would say. If it didn't work between them, if you didn't root for these two, if you didn't want them to be a knight and a squire, then the show wouldn't work. But you care about Dunk as a character. You care about him on his journey as a knight, and you care about Egg in his quest to simply serve this guy. Because you want someone to serve this guy. You want someone to support him and be his hype man. You want someone to make him feel like the knight he can be. The change of tone here is absolutely refreshing. The flashbacks to Sir Arlen, especially like the flashback that you get in, I think it's the opening of season 2, when Sir Arlen leaves his hut. But the flashbacks to Sir Arlen, Dunk hitting his head every time he walks through a doorway, the way he never knows which way to go, and he'll go one way, then turn around and go the other way. And then, the way that the show began with the Game of Thrones theme beginning to swell in this moment of heroism, and he's going to commit to this journey, and then he immediately starts defecating out of fear. The show knows what it wants to be, and you just get the sense that there is just a firm handle on the steering wheel, guiding this show forward. And honestly, it's different, not just not just from Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, but what I'm going to actually compare it to and what was giving me vibes. But Lord of the Rings. And the reason why I fell in love with Lord of the Rings, and I had read the books prior to Jackson's adaptation, but I think what made me fall in love with Lord of the Rings was the time spent living in this fully realized world. And I get that same sense here, whether it's just Dunk outside, and outside is rendered perfectly because it is beautiful and it's idealistic, but it's also raining a lot, which is just hard to sit through. And even when it's idyllic looking, he's still batting around flies, and that's not something that you see a lot. That aspect of nature, you get the sense of this how much you have to put up with during this time, how nothing is easy. But whether it's him just making his way to the town or even within the town as the tournament starts to get up, and it's all of this pre-gaming, this partying, the rituals that are being observed, the party in Sir Lionel's tent. It's such a much slower, smaller stakes story that allows us to luxuriate in these moments. And I don't ever want to leave this show. Episode 2. Dunk eulogizes Arlen to numerous participants at the tournament, including Lord Leo Tyrell, but no one remembers Arlen serving them. He witnessed the arrival of the Targaryen princes Baelor, Maekar, and Aerion. The Kingsguard, Sir Roland Crakehall, and Sir Donald of Duskendale, I love that name, Duskendale, by the way, questioned Dunk's legitimacy as a knight. Dunk sneaks into Ashford's castle and overhears the two of Maekar's sons, Daeron and Aegon. He hears that they're missing. He then asks the Targaryens to vouch for him. Baelor remembers Arlen and vouches for Dunk, but tells him to create his own coat of arms. Dunk and Egg watch over Tancel's performances, and an infatuated Dunk asks Tancel to paint a new coat of arms on his shield. Lionel drafts Dunk and Egg to help in a tug-of-war game, which they win. Dunk later sells a horse to afford a new set of armor from the blacksmith Steely Pate. I just want to call him Steely Pete. The tournament begins as Dunk and Egg watch the first jousting matches, which include Prince Valar Targaryen and Lord Medgar Tully among the participants. Dunk becomes despondent upon realizing that Arlen has no legacy because he achieved nothing in life, and that Dunk may end up exactly the same. So I think the goal of this episode is to just show how much of a fish out of water Dunk is within this larger world. Though the events aren't taking place in, like King's Landing and out, I think it's in the Riverlands. It's still a tournament that's bringing the highborn and royalty along with it, and the customs that one should expect to know and follow. But Dunk unfortunately doesn't know how, and he stumbles his way through scene to scene. It's a tightrope, I would say, for the showrunners. And the actor Peter Claffey, because if Dunk comes across as too incompetent, he's a clown. But if it's the right balance of sincerity, earnestness, and ignorance of the larger machine he's found himself in, then it works in his favor and it works in our favor. And Peter Claffey is an absolute revelation in this role. He's dogged in his determination to have someone vouch for him, but always playing it from a place of honor, with just a drop of pleading, but not too much for it to be pathetic groveling. And what's so endearing here is that everyone he encounters just instantly likes him. You can see, like, if this was Game of Thrones and someone blundered and stumbled their way into a meeting of the princes, that immediately he would be placed in prison or had his eyes removed, something like that. But everyone's just kind of enamored with him whenever they meet him. They're like, who is this hulking sweet boy giant of a man? And that endearing quality and that forgiveness that he earns every time he walks into a room. Again, it's so different than what we have seen in Game of Thrones. And it's just enjoyable to watch. And like I said, he's just a dogged, determined knight who wants to make something of himself. So we see it, and it's not without sacrifice. Selling Sir Arlen's horse to pay for his armor by Steely Pate, it's hard to watch. And think about it. Like, this is a franchise that has given us such brutality, such violence, such anguish, such torment, such torture, that for me, watching this sweet boy sell his master's horse, that was heartbreaking. That was almost too hard for me to just watch on screen. And, this is a show that gave us, castration, and multiple aggressions, bodily aggressions from one person to a next on the show, and him just having to say goodbye to the horse. It was just so sad and so hard to watch. And it shows, again, in this moment, it's not just about that. It's also allowing the showrunners an opportunity to show how kind he is and how truly honor-bound he is. Because he's someone who has to sell the horse in order to get some money. And what is the first thing he do with the money? He gives it to the person he bought the horse, he sold the horse to, so that this person could then feed the horse some oats and an apple. And it's just a moment that shows what a kind person he is. And again, it's he's determined, but he's not always good at what he's doing. Like him just like kind of lurking behind the scenes, thinking he's being quiet, but he's not. Again, like it creates this sense of like, who is this guy? Let's see how this plays out, but he his height, his gentleness, his earnestness, it seems like a foreign thing to the other people of Westeros, and it gives him an advantage. And again, this show is funny, whether it's the flashbacks to Sir Arlen, whether it's the way that Dunk, smashes his head every time he walks through a room, or whether it's, it's something when he's talking about the prince's sons being missing, he says something like, he's trying to be, knightly. And he says something like, may they not be found dead, something like that. But, his just blundering through these scenes is just such a joy to watch. At its heart here, it's a story of a young man questioning his place in life and whether he's destined to follow the path of the knight who raised him. Someone who had nothing to show for his life, someone who isn't remembered by those he pledged to serve. Though the show takes place in an imaginary medieval land where dragons recently dwelled, it's a theme that we can all relate to. Who doesn't want to make something of themselves? Who hasn't been young with dreams of something greater? Who hasn't looked at the world and been intimidated by it? Who hasn't wanted to shake off the dust of their small town and their means and make something of themselves? It doesn't matter if this is taking place in Westeros. This is a universal story. And we've seen it played out countless times, but to see it actually take place and have it be the center and the focus of a show within the Game of Thrones franchise, it's really a true joy to be able to watch. And this one just happens to include swords and armor and jousting. But at its heart, it's someone who wants to do good, wants to do right, wants to do something. And especially in this episode, he wants to be more than his predecessor. He wants to live up to the legacy and the memory of his predecessor, but also needs to reconcile that with the fact that the footsteps he's following in led to destitution and ultimately undignified death without anyone to remember him by, despite all of his sacrifices and questing. Okay, episode 3. When Dunk sleeps, Egg trains the warhorse Thunder. He's confronted by Sir Robin Riesling, who questions whether the horse was stolen. Egg later informs Dunk that only highborn knights compete on the tournament's first day. While Dunk buys food, Tansel tells him his shield will be ready that evening. Egg requests to squire for Dunk permanently, but they're interrupted by Plumber. And by the way, that first episode where Plumber is just making those horrid, like, throat cleansing noises, again, it's fun. It's fun to have a show that's not taking itself so seriously, but not taking itself too lightly at the same time. Anyway, so Plumber privately asks Dunk to take part in a rigged joust against Sir Andrew Ashford to recoup money spent on hosting the costly tournament, and gives Dunk a day to decide. During a jousting match, Arion acts dishonorably and mortally wounds Sir Humphrey Harding's horse, enraging the crowd. A fortune teller claims that Egg will become king and die horribly. Dunk and Raymond discuss Arion's jousting match, and Raymond expresses his hatred for the Targaryens. Egg watches one of Tansel's performances that portrays a dragon being slain. Feeling his family insulted, Arion breaks Tansel's finger. An infuriated Dunk attacks and loosens one of the prince's teeth. Guards quickly restrain Dunk as Arion prepares to knock his teeth out as revenge. Oof, and that would have been brutal. But Egg orders them to stop and reveals that he and Arion are brothers. So this episode all revolves around seeding and paying off this eventual twist, which, one thing that I really I think should be shouted out is the level of care and compassion and empathy and inclusion within the Game of Thrones community. So what do I mean by that? When the Red Wedding episode occurred, all of the Game of Thrones fans, or all of the Song of Ice and Fire fans, were waiting for that moment. That was like the key moment that they were looking forward to, and they couldn't wait for people to find out about it. But people didn't go out of their way to spoil it. I went into that, and I'm pretty active online and a big pop culture, connoisseur, and I did not know that was coming. And that's because of how carefully the Song of Ice and Fire fans took care to keep it from people. And similarly, people of that are fans of these properties have done incredibly well in not spoiling overtly the events of House of the Dragon, and the ultimate reveal that Egg is Aegon Targaryen. And if you're paying attention to Game of Thrones, like what's going to happen. In both House of the Dragon and this, as there's a major character who is not a major character, but a character of importance in Game of Thrones, who we see as a younger person here in this show, whose dying words he speaks to this character, Egg. I dreamed I was an old man. It's a beautiful scene. So for those of for those in the know, this is a moment that people have been looking forward to. But I also give everyone thanks and credit, all the credit in the world, for keeping it a secret from the people who didn't know that it was coming. I had picked up on it throughout the years through just pop cultural osmosis, but with that being said, it was still a wonderful moment, and you could see the seeds being planted. And it's funny because Dunk should have seen this coming. How does Egg know the names of the knights? How does Egg know that one of the Kingsguard's father owns the crab fishing boats? Or the fleet? How does he know these things about highborn life? If he's just a homeless boy. And right away, when he shows up without any hair, why would he be bald? Well, it's because he has the silver hair of the Targaryens, and wants to be incognito. It makes sense, So, if you're looking for it, it's right there in front of you the entire time, but not so much so that it's going to spoil the twist before the twist comes. And when the twist does come, it pays off those little seeds that have been planted. And it's a wonderful moment. And it completely, rocks the relationship between Dunk and Egg, and because up until this point, Egg had been, a servant of Dunk, and by Egg's very nature, Dunk has to be a servant to Egg. So where the relationship goes, it's a wonderful question. But that, despite the lie at the heart of this, the truth was these two characters really do care about each other, and that was never in question. And so that's, everything leading up to that moment. That's the big twist. That's the big moment. But almost as important as the twist is the demonstration of Duncan's honor. That in this moment, when someone is being hurt and it requires someone to be the knight that they say they are, only one person stands up. Even though he's putting himself truly in danger and his life in danger, he is standing for the beliefs that he has pledged himself to as a knight. And there are highborn knights, and there are those that have greater stature than he. He's just a hedge knight, but he's the only one that stands up to do the right thing, and he's about to lose his teeth and then his life badly for doing the right thing. But that's important to see, that Dunk is idealistic, and he's willing to live up to his ideals, even if it means that he's going to die for it. And it's just another reminder that the Targaryens suck. It doesn't matter what generation they are terrible people. It's a terrible bloodline, and they're going to do terrible things. The battle scenes that we get in the jousting, these are incredible sequences. And I guess the show kind of has to have them be worth their while, because they're the only sources of action that we're going to get, and they do not disappoint. They're really, really well done. I'm going to get to some spoilers that occur within this episode at the end of this review. So just remind me to get back there. But let me get into episode 4. I'll give my thoughts on episode 4, and then I'll go back to episode 3 and talk about the fortune teller and what the fortune teller tells Egg. Episode 4. Egg tells an imprisoned Dunk that his real name is Aegon Targaryen, the 5th, I believe, and explains that he lied to become a squire after his brother Daeron refused to participate in the tournament. Baelor informs Dunk that Daeron has also accused him of kidnapping Egg. Dunk requests a trial by combat, but Aerion demands a trial by 7. Baelor clarifies that Dunk must find 6 knights to fight beside him in a 7-versus-7 joust at dawn or face punishment. Stefan agrees to fight for Dunk, and Egg notifies him that Daeron, Maekar, and 3 Kingsguard will fight for Aerion. Daeron apologizes to Dunk and promises to intentionally fall from his horse. He privately tells Dunk about a prophetic dream where he saw Dunk with a dead dragon. Steely Pate informs Dunk that Tencel has fled Ashford, then gives him his shield and armor. As dawn breaks, Ed brings Lionel, Robin, Harding, and Sir Humphrey Beesbury to fight for Dunk, but Stefan switches sides after revealing that Aerion promised him a lordship. Lionel knights Raymond to replace Stefan. Still 1 knight short, Dunk appeals to the crowd's honor. Baelor declares that he will fight for Dunk. Awesome, awesome moment. So my thoughts here are that for anyone that might not have been vibing with this story, because it feels so different, more comedic, less urgent, stakes are not as large, this might be the episode that ropes you in. Because the stakes here have increased. We're not fighting for honor or legacy or sport. Duncan is fighting for his life, and the show has a simple conflict that we can get behind. Duncan must recruit 6 knights to fight beside him. Which knights will stand true to the code of honor and fight beside a man who saw a wrong and tried to right it? Or who will just stand aside and let another injustice occur? It's an episode that builds and builds with betrayals, Stefan, and the reveal that Baelor will fight on behalf of Duncan. And Baelor is a cool character. I like this guy because he quietly understands the corruption and the rot within his family. And that's what it appears to be. At least, I can't speak for the books, but this is the presentation of the character as I'm interpreting on the screen. He's someone that is trying to be noble, someone that is trying to live a life of honor. He's the only one that recognizes Sir Arlen. He's the only one that gives him his moment of glory through recognition. And in that moment, he not only honors Arlen, but he honors Dunk in that moment by actually ensuring that the thing that Dunk was seeking was not in vain and was not like a sense of failure, that there was legitimacy to Arlen, and that the claims were not false. And so for Baelor to give that gift to Dunk, and then later to give him this gift where he will fight against his family for honor, that's dope. That is dope. And so this episode was great. The building tension and the conclusion and just getting ready to get into the fight. Oh my God, I can't wait. And we have to wait a week, longer than normal because it aired on Friday because of Super Bowl Sunday. So now I have to wait, a couple extra days on top of it, which stinks. I want that episode. But let me go back actually to the previous episode where the fortune teller tells Egg the following: "You shall be king and die in a hot fire, and worms shall feed upon your ashes, and all who know you shall rejoice in your dying." So this is going to be a spoiler for those of you who don't want to know what all of this means. So you can head away now. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned to the Stephen King Cast Patreon feed and to the live feed. Come back for my follow-up thoughts to A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and more to come. You can always write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. So, spoiler alert. So he says, "You shall be king and die in a hot fire, and worms shall feed upon your ashes, and all who know you shall rejoice in your dying." So this is in reference to what's called it's Summerhall. It's the tragedy of Summerhall. And to make a long story short, many years later, Egg becomes the king of Westeros. Duncan becomes his Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Again, spoiler alert, if you don't want to know what happens to these characters. Egg is now known as his proper name, King Aegon, and he's attempting to rekindle the Targaryen legacy by trying to bring dragons back into the world. Now, the way that he tries to do it, from what I understand, is that he tries to use wildfire that Cersei used in Game of Thrones most famously. And it doesn't go well. And Summerhall ends in flames, as does Dunk and Egg, and this is their end. This is how they die, sadly. So that is a reference to events that will come many years down the road, unfortunately, for Dunk and Egg, which is so tragic and sad. Because look at the two of them. They're just, though they are surrounded by a hard life, they're trying to find these happy moments. And I guess that, the message here is find those moments where you can, because we're never guaranteed a happy ending. So it's up to us to make as happy moments as we possibly can, which we've seen from them in making their own luck when the shooting star falls. Now, please note that the summary that I just provided about Summerhall, it's brief. It's brief on my end purposefully, because I'm trying not to do too much research into it. I don't want to spoil the events of House of the Dragon for myself. So if I screwed something up in my summary of Summerhall, I do apologize, everyone. I am sorry. So everyone, those are my thoughts on the first 4 episodes of Night of the Seven Kingdoms. I am really enjoying it. I hope you are enjoying it as well. And you can get further thoughts of this by following the Deadlights tier of the Stephen King Cast on Patreon. You can follow me on TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, and on Facebook. If you have any thoughts on any time on anything related to A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, Westeros, Game of Thrones, Stephen King, any of the properties that I had mentioned that I am going to be reviewing, you can write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. You can follow all things related to the Stephen King Cast at stephenkingcast.com, and that includes a link to this Patreon. It includes a collection of podcast episodes organized by theme. It includes playlists that include musical stylings based on the texts that are being reviewed per episode. There is a blog as well that you can follow, and it's an easy way to be able to contact me. So for all things Stephen King Cast, you can head on over to stephenkingcast.com. And if you have any time on your hands leaving a review on any of the podcast platforms that you use to listen to the Stephen King Cast, that would be greatly appreciated. So that's all that I have this week, everyone. So may you have long days and pleasant nights, and I'll see you here next time where MOON spells Stephen King Cast.